Hello and welcome back to the VolReport Show. I'm Ryan Sylvia with VolReport.com on the Rivals Network. And Tennessee football is off to a 4-0 start. Two top 25 wins, one over an NC State team that doesn't necessarily look top 25 anymore, but Tennessee dominates in that game. And then now a road win over a top 15 Oklahoma team who has a fantastic defense. And Tennessee goes in there, does what it needs to do, and comes out with a 10-point win. I wanted to hop on and just kind of give my thoughts about this start for Tennessee. And I'll be first to admit, I didn't necessarily think that Tennessee would be this good. I thought that they were a 9-3, 10-2 team. Nico's first year as a starter, a lot of young pieces in the secondary, a lot of question marks at running back behind Dylan Sampson and some other places on the field. Maybe it could be a 9-3 team. Well, through 4 weeks, I mean, we'll get to the schedule outlook at the end of things, but this team looks like they could be an actual national championship contender. So I'll admit, going into this season, I was a little short on what this team actually could accomplish. And through 4 games, I mean, I'm sold. This team, it feels like now their floor is 10 wins, and 10 wins with an SEC schedule. That is a college football playoff berth in the 12-team playoff. It absolutely is. And if you can get to that 11 mark, then you're probably at the very least hosting a college football playoff game as one of those 5 through 8 seeds. And if you can go 12-0, you're playing in that SEC championship game and you can win that game, well, then you're one of those top 4 teams and you get a bye. There's 8 games to be played in the regular season. There's a lot of football ahead of Tennessee and a lot of big games in the schedule. Like I said, we'll get to the schedule outlook to wrap things up and kind of see where things lie there. But let's talk about where this team is overall, but it's specifically in that Oklahoma game that we just saw. Start off with Nico. I think everyone across the country, you think of Tennessee football right now, you think of Nico Iamaleava, and rightfully so. He's 4th in Heisman odds, and he has a real case to be a guy that will not only be in New York for that ceremony, but will win that entire award. And against Oklahoma, they didn't ask him to be the Nico Iamaleava that could be in New York City for the Heisman ceremony. They asked him to control the game. And you hear game manager kind of thrown around as a diss towards a lot of quarterbacks. That was kind of what Nico was against Oklahoma, but not in a bad way at all, in a way that conduced winning for Tennessee. I mean, you saw that second half. Josh Heupel said, okay, what is the only way we're going to lose this game? If there's turnovers. So Josh Heupel with his team, instead of putting Nico in harm's way, whether that's throwing the ball in the air, we saw 2 turnovers against NC State, which I did think was a big point of growth for him, was turning the ball over for the first time against, a real team like NC State. He joked after the game against Oklahoma that they asked him, hey, is there any temptation to force the ball when maybe things aren't going as well as they have in recent weeks through the air? And he said, I think I learned that lesson against NC State. So I do think that was a big point of growth for him and something that he's used to his advantage. But Josh Heupel didn't let that even be the case. And the way he turned the ball over twice against Oklahoma are strip sacks where he really couldn't do much with the ball. I don't put either of those on him. Both coming across the edge, one on his blind side, especially that one. You can't put anything, any blame on him for that one. But overall, he takes care of the football. So if you're Josh Heupel and you see what your defense is doing, I don't think there's any reason to put any risk in turning the ball over and to just giving free possessions to Oklahoma in plus territory and things like that. Tennessee already did it twice in that game and got a turnover immediately afterwards, which was a big key to that win. So why not just run the ball with Dylan Sampson? I think that was the right plan. It wasn't pretty, and it maybe had Tennessee fans with their battered ball syndrome kind of chewing on their fingernails for a couple minutes. But realistically, that second half never felt like Tennessee wasn't going to win. And Tennessee shuts the door, and they do win that game. So how do you grade Nico in a game where he's just asked to kind of be that manager? He's just asked to make the right reads and do what's in front of him, which most of the time, especially in that second half, was just receiving the snap and handing it off and getting out of the way. I don't think you give him an A+, but I do think you give him by far a passing grade. And you saw the flashes of why he gets that passing grade. A throw to Dante Thornton, where maybe there's a misstep in the secondary. Dante Thornton sees a lot of green grass. Well, that ball's on the money. I mean, that ball was exactly where it needs to be. And that's a very underrated part of these elite quarterbacks like Nico, is just you have a guy in stride. If you hit him in stride, it's a touchdown. If that ball's a little bit off and Nico doesn't deliver it in that exact spot, maybe that's not a 66-yard touchdown, and maybe Tennessee doesn't get a touchdown out of that possession. They score 2 touchdowns the entire game. One of them's on that splash play. Who knows what happens if that ball isn't exactly where it needs to be? Well, Nico puts it exactly where it needs to be. You saw a nice play to Brew McCoy where Brew kind of looked like Juwan Jennings dragging a couple defenders down the field and getting it deep into Oklahoma territory to set up a field goal. But that's another kind of easy, not the hardest throw in the world, but another good throw from Nico. That's where it needs to be, and it ends up resulting in 3 points. In that second half, another big play that results in 3 points to Brew McCoy, where he throws a really pretty deep ball. And maybe it's a tad bit in front of Brew McCoy, but it was in the catch radius. Brew McCoy comes up with it. That's not an easy throw by any means. It's got to be in front of Brew. Like, you can't have him slow down at all. So it's a really tight window realistically, and he puts enough air under it that Brew's able to get under it and make a really nice catch. But once again, a really nice throw from Nico. There's going to be a couple that maybe he wants back, maybe a few at the beginning of the game where maybe you make the wrong read on an RPO or things like that, but no critical errors from Nico. And when the situations arrived, and it was few and far between, but when they did, he made the play. So I think you give Nico a thumbs up, and I think you move on. And I think you look at the schedule coming up, and you see an Arkansas game, and that could be a game where maybe Nico is asked to do a little bit more. And I think Tennessee's run game will do a lot in that game as well. But that's a game that I think you could see Nico really show off his arm and have that kind of, in quotes, Heisman type of performance where you look at the stat sheet and you're like, oh my gosh, he threw for over 300, multiple touchdowns, did this and that. I think that could be the Arkansas game. I think that could be the Mississippi State game on the schedule, the Kentucky game. You see some games on the schedule that he's going to be asked to kind of maybe do a little bit more against a defense that's not as good as Oklahoma's. And that could be part of the situation where that's when he's finally in New York for the Heisman ceremony at the end of things. But Nico, thumbs up. I think he did a good job. Not an A+ performance, but well good enough for Tennessee to obviously win that football game by multiple scores. But part of the reason that Nico maybe didn't have the ball in his hands in that second half is that tackle position. Lance Hurd, 5-star LSU transfer, he misses the game. It's his second straight game he's missing. Maybe a good bye week situation for Tennessee coming up where he will have an extra week to rest. But Lance Hurd misses that game. And then in the first half, John Campbell Jr. gets injured, comes back for, I think, one drive, and then says, I can't do it anymore. And you have backup tackles at both spots. At the end of that game, you have Larry Johnson III, who's played very, very seldomly at Tennessee at left tackle, and Dane Davis, who's played a lot of football, but maybe wasn't even having the best game against Oklahoma at right tackle. You saw the response was some 12 personnel to try to get 2 tight ends on the field. You saw some plays where like the play to Brew McCoy down the field in that second half. You're in 12 personnel. You have both of your tight ends in the backfield just kind of flanking that tackle immediately, and you have the running back at pass protection. You had 2 routes being ran on that play because you knew you needed max protection for Nico, considering not only the numbers that Oklahoma was bringing, but the success rate that they were bringing against this banged-up offensive line that Tennessee had. So Tennessee had to scheme some things. They couldn't necessarily operate the offense as they typically did because that tackle position took 2 massive hits and both starters were out. That is a game changer, and it literally changed the way the game was played in the second half, that Tennessee decided they didn't want to kind of put Nico out to dry, and that's, once again, one of the only ways that Tennessee was going to lose that game in that second half of this, they turned the ball over. So you got to get those guys healthy. We talked about at the beginning what this team could be, a 12, 11, 10-win team. A lot of that changes if either of those injuries end up being major. Josh Heupel says after the game that he anticipates or he hopes that those guys will be back for the game at Arkansas in 2 weeks from now. But once again, that bye week could be kind of a big deal for Tennessee if either of those guys are able to use that to return and get to maybe some better shape for SEC play as that really starts to ramp up. So that tackle spot on both sides is definitely something to keep an eye on. It's already changed how Tennessee's played a half of football, and it could be pivotal going forward. And that, once again, kind of plays into the Nico perspective from that game against Oklahoma where they took the ball out of his hands. A lot of it's not to do with him personally, but maybe the pieces around him. But one of the pieces around him that I thought had kind of an underrated game, it took him a little bit to get going, but by the end of it, you look at the stat sheet, Dylan Sampson. Now, Dylan Sampson, there's a stretch in there where they kind of turned to Deshaun Bishop, who debatably had a better game. I think Deshaun Bishop, at the end of things, Deshaun goes 16 carries for 65 yards, 4.1 a pop, 17 as his long. He had a really nice game off the bench for Tennessee. But Dylan Sampson, 24 carries, 92 yards, 3.8 yards per pop, 1 touchdown, a long of 16. And that second touchdown drive that Tennessee has, it was like 6 plays, 40-something yards. Every single play was a handoff to Dylan Sampson, carries the team down the field, and they find the end zone. Once again, banged up offensive line. Oklahoma's defense is really good, and Dylan Sampson still finds a way to be really productive and just 8 yards short of hitting that 100 mark. As a team, Tennessee gets to 151, by the way. Nico rushes for 15, and that includes kind of the sacks as negatives. But if this is kind of the worst Dylan Sampson we're going to see, like in terms of production, Tennessee's in a really good spot. Like, it felt like it was really tough for Tennessee to get the run game going, and you're still sitting there with 151 yards on the game, and your top back has 92 yards, 3.8 a carry, and a touchdown. That's a really good floor to have, and I think that is kind of the floor for Dylan Sampson this year. 3 weaker opponents to start the season. NC State's defense isn't that bad, and at least then, obviously it's not as good as Oklahoma's and a lot of that Tennessee will see, but it's not Kent State is what I'm trying to say. Like, that is a team that is a Power 5, Power 4 football team and has expectations to win a lot of games. It doesn't look like they're going to reach that, but still probably a bowl team. But Dylan Sampson runs all over them. And now Dylan Sampson, once again, it's kind of his floor, right? It feels like this is maybe one of the worst Dylan Sampson performances we're going to see all year, and he's dang near 100 yards. So I think that speaks to the level that Dylan Sampson's playing at. He's already at 10 touchdowns through 4 games this year, and he hasn't played in the second half in pretty much 3 of them. So the most under-talked about guy in college football right now remains Tennessee's running back, Dylan Sampson. I mean, that is, if he can kind of up his pass protection, which he has, but if he can continue to build as a better and better blocker in the pass game, that's a guy that could be a first-round pick on an NFL team. He is dynamic with the ball in his hands, whether that's on passes, whether that's just straight handoffs. He's a smart runner. He knows the holes to hit. He knows the pace that he needs to play with. Dylan Sampson has been extremely, extremely impressive. But once again, you also have to tip your cap to Deshaun Bishop, who debatably had a better game against Oklahoma. And that's saying something because, once again, not like it was a bad performance at all from Dylan Sampson. Last thing I want to hit on offense before we'll flip to the defensive side of the ball and then kind of look at the schedule going forward. Dante Thornton Jr. is a weapon for Tennessee right now. We talked about the throw from Nico, and Dante gets into open space and makes a big play. That's been what he's done all season, is get into space, get the ball in his hands, and make a big play. He's got 2 catches for 73 yards and a touchdown, average of 36.5, the long of 66, and he also has one that's called back that was another big splash play. So Dante Thornton, he's not even playing that much too, which is kind of the funny thing. Like, if you look at the snap counts, he's the 4th guy pretty much every week. I'll pull it up right now to be exact. But Dante Thornton, out of the 75 snaps that Tennessee's offense ran against Oklahoma, he's on the field for 27 of them. So he's only on the field for about a third of snaps that Tennessee had. Brew McCoy easily on the field the most, 63. Squirrel White in the slot at 42. Dante Thornton or Chris Brazzell, 2 ahead of Dante Thornton at 29, then Dante Thornton at 27. They also get Chaz Nimrod 12, Caleb Webb 7, Mike Matthews 2. And you have to think of the 12 personnel as well as taking a receiver off the field. But Dante Thornton, I feel like, is being underutilized, and maybe that's part of the idea of him is you get him that rest and you kind of unleash him in the spots that you want to, and he can make those big plays down the field. But he is having a terrific, terrific season for Tennessee through 4 games. You look at the stats. Last season, he went, 9-10 games before getting hurt against Missouri. The entire year, 13 receptions, 224 yards, and a touchdown. This season, through 4 games, 7 receptions, so already over halfway there, 242 yards, which is more than last season, and 3 touchdowns, which is, of course, more than the 1 he caught last season. So I would like to see him get involved maybe a little bit more. I don't know how likely or possible that is for Tennessee, depending on how they want to use him. But I mean, you can make a debate that he's been the best player or the best receiver with this offense so far. I think the answer to the best receiver has been Brew McCoy, and he had another really nice game, 4 catches for 92 yards, and he's been kind of Nico's favorite target. I still think Brew's the best receiver on this team, but Dante Thornton has certainly been a weapon, and I'm interested to see how that develops throughout the year and kind of if he can maybe find his way to more and more snaps. I still really like Chris Brazzell. I still think that he could be a big factor for this team, but he's been quiet through 4 weeks, and he's still that starter. You still see the coaching staff show faith in him. But Dante Thornton, man, I've been really impressed with him through 4 games, and I think he could kind of build that into a really nice season if he can continue that and kind of get on a lot of radars going forward. Defense, obviously it's one of the best defenses in the country, and for me, this is what I wrote about right after the game. 2021, when Josh Heupel took this job, I think to that Kentucky game, right? What was the final score? 45-42, and you just have to win a shootout. You even think to the Alabama win in 2022 the next year, 52-49. You just got to win. Like, you just cannot get off the field. You got to win in a shootout. If I told you in that 2021 season when Tennessee is just bleeding on defense and just begging their offense to pick up the pieces with Hendon Hooker and company, or even in that 2022 season where the defense definitely took a step in the right direction, but still had games, of course, South Carolina and some other games where the defense just could not get off the field, that Tennessee is going to go into Oklahoma against an offense that, yeah, they're struggling. They don't have the best offensive line, but they're going to go in and they're just going to dominate on the defensive end of the ball. It's going to change the entire way the game is called. It's going to change the entire way Josh Heupel attacks the second half. And it's going to be a 10-point lead. And you just don't feel like Tennessee ever was going to lose that football game in the second half, really. That's crazy that they've had that turnaround in that amount of time. And a lot of it is getting the right pieces in there. There's no team in the country with more depth on the defensive line than Tennessee has. And it starts with James Pierce Jr. at the Leo spot. I think he finally got half a sack in this game to get on the stat sheet sack-wise. Let's see. They're going to give him half a sack. But he's lived in the backfield against these teams. They're just getting the ball out. You look at Tyree West, who has been so good for Tennessee off the edge at the defensive end position. He comes up with a sack in that game, and he's been another guy like Dylan Sampson that is just not getting enough attention nationally as he should, because Tyree West has been phenomenal, debatably the best player on this defense through 4 weeks of football. They have pieces, 12 pieces on you saw Jason Jenkins get a safety, and I think he had another TFL in that game in like 5 snaps too. Let's see. Jason Jenkins plays 5 snaps against Oklahoma, and he comes up with the final line of 2 tackles, half a sack, 1.5 tackles for loss, and is in on the safety. That is your 12th guy coming in the game on the defensive line, the number 12 guy, and he is registering a performance like that. There is no team in the country with a deeper defensive line than Tennessee, and that's not news, but it's what this entire team operates around on the defensive side of the ball. But Keenan Peely at the linebacker position has been what's really caught my eye this year outside of that defensive line. You heard all offseason for 2 years now that Keenan Peely is the real deal, that he's obviously smart. He's played a lot of football, but that he's a really good football player. And you can go back and you can watch the BYU film, and he stands out and he looks good. But we never saw it because he gets hurt against Virginia week 1 last year, and he's out for the season. So with all that time, with all the hype that builds, with him being a representative for Tennessee at SEC Media Days, with him being someone that the coaching staff has talked so highly about, whether that's Brian Jean-Marie last season as the linebackers coach or whether that's William Inge this year taking over for Coach BJ at the linebacker coach position, they've just had nothing but great things to say about Keenan Peely. Well, he is absolutely living up to the hype. And personally for me, like how I was maybe a little low on Tennessee as a team in going into the year, I was maybe a little bit low on Keenan Peely. And I thought he was going to be good. That's just how great Keenan Peely's been. He's been awesome at the middle linebacker position. It seems like every single play, at least on the ground, he's in on the tackle. He's always in the right spots. He's done a good job dropping into coverage. He is the quarterback of this defense, and he's got the green sticker on his helmet to be the guy that gets the radio in from Tim Banks and kind of literally not calls the defense, but kind of is that leader of the defense right there in the middle. But Keenan Peely has been phenomenal for Tennessee this year, and he's been a big piece of that defense that, once again, maybe isn't getting talked about enough. I don't know about nationally for him, but maybe just even within kind of the Vol fan base. Like, he's getting talked about a good amount, but the defensive line's getting the love as they should. Keenan Peely is a big piece of the puzzle for what Tennessee's doing on the defensive end. Another big piece of the puzzle that's kind of caught my eye, the cornerback position. I still have a lot of question marks in the secondary outside of the cornerbacks. I have question marks at the star position. Christian Harrison had a really nice game, especially considering how much he had to play with Boo Carter getting injured early in that game. And Boo Carter's been really good coverage-wise. He's had a couple plays where he kind of gets beat pretty bad in coverage, but he's young, and I don't have any reason to think he won't improve in that category and all the other categories and be a great player for Tennessee. Christian Harrison, he's been solid. It sucks that they lost Jordan Thomas, and I think that would have kind of even helped this defense take another step forward. The safeties, I've liked Andre Turrentine. I've liked Jacoby Thomas, big hitter, maybe a step slow at times. Will Brooks, just kind of another guy like Keenan Peely, where he's kind of in the right place at the right time. But there's still some question marks that I have around that safety spot for Tennessee. But the starting two cornerbacks in Ricky Gibson and Jermod McCoy have been really, really good for Tennessee. And it's helped that defensive line too, because, of course, the defensive line helps the secondary. When the defensive line's getting home and you don't have to guard as long, that helps. But it also helps when the quarterback looks down the field and his first read covered, second read covered, so on. That also helps your defensive line get home. So it's been complementary, but those two cornerback positions have been really good in my mind, or in my eye. Jermod McCoy obviously comes up with the pick. Jackson Arnold, I'm not sure what he saw there when he threw that ball, but Jermod McCoy, good hands in the right spot, good coverage to be there in the first place, and he comes up with the pick. Ricky Gibson's been locked down. But yeah, Jermod McCoy has been really, really good for Tennessee. A true sophomore, both of those guys sophomores, so they're still growing, they're still learning. You have to feel really good about those cornerback positions. But then also Jalen McMurray, stepping in off the bench kind of here and there, giving those guys kind of a couple snaps to catch their breath. I thought Jalen McMurray stepped in. I wasn't sure what to expect from him as a Temple transfer, but he's been good so far. I think you have to be happy with his play as well at the cornerback position. So cornerbacks, you get 2 thumbs up. Star, you get a thumbs up. I think safety, you still have to give him a thumbs up, but maybe more tentative, and we'll see where that's at going forward. But I do really like Andre Turrentine. I think that he's been a big piece of this defense as well. All right, let's get to the schedule. Let's see what Tennessee football has left on this football schedule, and kind of what's a realistic expectation for what Tennessee could be this year, and what they could ultimately accomplish. Let's pull this up really fast. Tennessee football. So obviously 4-0, 69-3 win over Chattanooga, 51-10 win over NC State, who was ranked 24 at the time in Charlotte, 71-0 over Kent State at home. That was a 65-0 game at halftime, where Tennessee just kind of they literally wanted to let the clock run, but they just kind of sat on the football and let things wind down in that second half. And then your marquee win so far, 25-15 over Oklahoma on the road. You get a week off. Really good timing. You can get those tackles healthy, hopefully. You can get some other positions, some rest. Boo Carter, from what I've heard, it seems like he'll be fine, but we'll have to see what the official word is on Boo Carter. But another guy that could use maybe a little bit of time to heal up. I'm sure Jalen Sampson, with the workload he's got, could use a little bit of time to kind of lick his wounds before this trip to Arkansas. I'm not too worried about this Arkansas game. They haven't looked great. They looked good in their first 2 weeks. 70-0 over Arkansas Pine Bluff. Similar to Tennessee beating the crap out of Kent State. You should beat them bad, but man, that offense looked good in that win. I don't know if they punted the ball in that game. It was every time they touched the ball, they were just flying down the field. A really nice opening win for Sam Pittman and company, for a team that had really low expectations. You go to Oklahoma State, who's got Ollie Gordon, who's supposed to be really good. You take him to overtime and you barely lose. And I think that's a game that kind of maybe, despite the loss, gave you some confidence in Arkansas that they could be a real kind of, not a contender, but a team that you can't sleepwalk through. And then you win by 10 against UAB, and then you just have an ugly 24-14 win over Auburn. That was who wanted to lose that game more, it felt like at times, and Auburn certainly was the team that wanted to lose it more. I don't have any second guessing of Tennessee going into Arkansas and just kind of laying it on the Razorbacks. I think, like I said at the beginning of the show, that could be a game where Nico has a really good performance and the numbers really start to take a spike up, and you really kind of firmly cement yourself in that Heisman competition as you get towards the midpoint of the season. So that game I don't have much worry with. The next week, Tennessee begins a crazy homestand. You host Florida on the 12th of October. Florida sucks. I mean, they are not good. And that is not breaking news to anyone, but they have not looked good. And once again, even in a win on the road over Mississippi State, I never sat there and was like, yeah, they're putting it together. It was, Mississippi State looks really bad, because that's a Mississippi State team that got killed by Toledo the week before as well. They're trying the 2-quarterback system over in Gainesville, DJ Lagwing, Graham Mertz. Both of them did actually really well in that Mississippi State game, but I think that says a lot more about Mississippi State, who Tennessee also has on the schedule, than it does about that Florida team. Tennessee fans are always going to be scared of Florida coming to town just because of the recent history. I don't think this will be a game that Tennessee struggles with. I don't think that Florida's offense is going to be able to do really anything against Tennessee's defense. And I think on the opposite side of that, Tennessee's offense shouldn't have much issue against Florida's defense. So it's another game that I don't think Tennessee should be overly worried about. And what SEC play, of course, you have to show up for every game or you're going to lose, but I don't have any doubts that they won't come in with the right mindset and all these. Your first ginormous test, you had a big test against Oklahoma, you had a decent test against NC State, and you'll have those 2 tests in between with Arkansas and Florida. Your first ginormous juggernaut of a test, then next week against Alabama. New regime, though. Nick Saban's gone. Kalen DeBoer, what's he going to bring to Knoxville? First time coming to Knoxville since you lost in Knoxville with Nick Saban in 22. I think Alabama's good. I think Jalen Milroe is going to be a pain in the rear end to watch from the Tennessee perspective. I think he's going to extend plays. There's going to be third downs where you think Tennessee's off the field. The next thing you know, Jalen Milroe extends a play and either throws it for a first down or uses his legs to rush for a first down, and it's going to be a pain to watch. But at the end of the day, I do think Tennessee wins that football game. I predicted that going into the season. I'm not going to back off now. I think Tennessee wins that game at home, and I think a big reason for that is that it's in Neyland Stadium, and that is a very tough place to win football games. However, that is going to be the biggest game outside of one coming up on the schedule that Tennessee could lose. So I think that's when you start to really form. A lot of opinions have been formed already about Tennessee through 4 games. You just had that road test at Oklahoma. I think that Alabama game is when you can really tell if this team is a national title contender, though. Tennessee handles Alabama, they can handle pretty much anyone in the country, and they could make a run. If they can't handle Alabama, maybe it's just a playoff team that flames out, and there's no shame in that at all. But I think you learn about Tennessee from that Alabama game. Next week, Kentucky at home. Kentucky looks god-awful as well. I guess the last 2 weeks they haven't been too bad. You open up with a nice one over Southern Miss, 31-0. You'd like to see more offense, and then you get smoked by South Carolina in your home stadium, which is not good. South Carolina looks better than I thought, but still not great. You played tough with Georgia. That's been kind of a weird theme recently between those 2 schools, but your offense with Brock Vandagriff just is not inspiring. And then you take care of business against Ohio. The needle has not been moved on me at all from UK. I think that's probably a 6-6 team, and not a team that Tennessee is going to have to worry about much. After Kentucky is when you have Mississippi State, and that could get gross at home. That could be a 2022 Tennessee, Missouri at home, where that score is just insanely lopsided. Mississippi State's going to be without their quarterback, Blake Shapen. I believe he's out for the season. They beat Eastern Kentucky by a bunch, and then they lost on the road to Arizona State. They got smoked by Toledo, and they got smoked by Florida. Both those Toledo and Florida games at home. And it's not like things get easier, so it's not like they're going to be able to build much momentum. You're going at number 1 Texas. You're going at Georgia, number 2. You're hosting 24 A&M. You have Arkansas and UMass at home. Maybe you can make something happen there. And then you're going at number 5 Tennessee. And then even after that, you're hosting number 11 Missouri, and you're at 6 Ole Miss. It's going to be a tough season for Mississippi State and Jeff Lebby. That's a tough turnaround. That's a tough ask for Jeff Lebby, especially now that your quarterback's injured. Another game, though, that I just do not think Tennessee will have to really worry about much at all. There's the next test, though. At Georgia, number 2 in the country. That's a game I think Tennessee loses, and there's no shame in losing at Georgia in November. You just have to be competitive in it, though. Like, if you get blown out, then yeah, that's not good. But if you can hang in there and you lose by 1 or 2 possessions, I don't think there's any big deal about that. At that point, let's say you're undefeated going into that, you're still going to be 11-1 looking at the last 2 games on the schedule, and you're still going to be very firmly in that playoff picture and probably hosting a game in Eatland Stadium, which would be pretty cool. So Georgia, they look beatable, but I still think that that's a team that's going to beat Tennessee, given that it's in Athens. Final 2 games, UTEP coming to Knoxville, final home game of the season, senior day for Tennessee. That'll be played at 1 p.m. Eastern. UTEP is not good, guys. That is one of the worst FBS teams, which is saying something because Tennessee already beat Kent State, which is the worst FBS team. And then after that, you go on the road to Vanderbilt. Diego, he's been solid at quarterback for Vanderbilt. He's been fun to watch. Not good enough, though, to beat Tennessee in this defense. At least I don't think so. So that's the remaining schedule for Tennessee. In recap, I mean, how many losses are realistically on there? 1, 2? You got to wake up for SEC games. There's usually one that catches you a little bit that you didn't expect. But on paper, 11-1 on paper. And the game's not played on paper, but on paper, 11-1, I think that's probably the case. Maybe 10-2, that's still a playoff spot. In the ceiling, of course, 12-0. This Tennessee team's really good. I didn't think they would be bad by any means. I thought they would be good, like pretty good. This Tennessee team's really, really good, though. And there's a lot of football to be played. But this schedule, in my opinion, at least shapes up pretty nicely for Tennessee. Your road games, you got one out of the way in Oklahoma. Arkansas, Vanderbilt are not very scary teams to me. And then you got Georgia, which that's Georgia. That stinks. But a lot of your bigger games as well at home, shaping up for a really fun season in Knoxville. If you want to be along the ride for the rest of the way, make sure you head over to VolReport.com. We'll have coverage throughout the season. There's a longer podcast today. I kind of got carried away talking about the rest of the schedule, but I'm excited for football season. I love football, so it's fun to talk about a good football team like Tennessee has. So I'm not going to necessarily apologize for a longer episode today because, man, it's fun to cover this Tennessee football team when they're playing like this. So if you want to be there the rest of the way, though, VolReport.com. I have everything you need across Tennessee athletics. We'll have men's, women's basketball starting up soon. Tennessee baseball looking to defend their national title throne. Tennessee softball looking to defend their SEC title throne and kind of bounce back after a super regional loss last season. We'll have all the coverage you need, Tennessee sports, the rest of the year and beyond. Links to everything you need is in the description. Thank you for watching.